Winter. Time for ice fishing, snowmobiles, and maybe a little pond hockey. Winter's full of fun and games. Until a pipe freezes and bursts. Get ahead of the freezing weather with Mow and Flow. It monitors your home's water and shuts it off automatically before it can burst your winter plans. Moen.
This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet.
Very pleased to bring in the outstanding Mark Wogenrich. Mark, always great to have you on. Appreciate the time very much.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks as always.
I thought the last question of the press conference with Jim Knowles on Tuesday was yours, and that was the one where he just volunteered at the end. He said, I think in the end, I think I can help. I thought in the end, that was, to me, the answer of the day. What did you think?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for. That was, my question really to Jim. I think everybody's there, but just generally was, why are you here? This is, Jim Knowles is a very different hire, I think, than James Franklin has made. Maybe not so much, but and not as much in defense or, with history, but, offensively, he's never made, what I'm trying to get at, he's never made like a change at defense. You know what I mean? If that makes sense. He's never gone and said, we're going in another direction. His defensive coordinators have always left for another reason, to become head coaches, like Tom Allen going to Clemson. He's never gone and said, we need to take this defense in a different direction. It's not working. Every defensive move he's made has been kind of just incremental staging upward. So when you've got essentially what was ranked the number 4 defense in the country last year, coming out of Manny Diaz and Tom Allen, he's not remaking the culture of the room. He's not remaking the strategic move, of the defense. He wants the defense then. He wants a championship defense, right? He wants a defense that can win a title. Not that they haven't had that, but they just haven't done it yet. So with Jim now, you arguably have the architect, the number 1 architect in the country who can come and do that. So that's really kind of where I wanted to start with him, and then ultimately that's where we kind of finished with him. Is why are you here? Why are you here at Penn State now? He can talk, he talked a lot about growing up in Philadelphia, and Penn State was kind of, the team that that was on television and highlight shows and just that sort of thing. But it was interesting to me when he said, I think it can be of service. And I found that kind of a really compelling idea because at, this age in his career, he could go anywhere. For the most part, I don't know that there's a team in the country that would not welcome Jim Knowles in as defensive coordinator. So for him to be able to come to Penn State and to say he thinks that the pieces are in place to win, and that he said, I think his quote was that they're so close here to winning it all, and that he wants to be a part of that, I found pretty compelling.
At Western Michigan, at Duke, and at Oklahoma State, he did have a player that he referred to as the jack position. Now, he did try it his first year at Ohio State, and I think he got some blowback on that. That's a different issue. When he was describing that, and Jack Ham and I heard that, there was a player we had in mind. I'm going to be interested to find out if this is the same player you had in mind. Who would that be?
I thought a little bit about that. It would be Abdul Carter. Obviously,
yeah,
I think it would be absolutely perfect in that. If he can convince him one more year, we know he wouldn't. I'm wondering if maybe it felt almost like he's kind of young. And he didn't play, but he played a little bit more last year, later in the season. I thought maybe Max Granville potentially could kind of play that role because he played a little bit of what Abdul did. I know when Abdul got hurt and they kind of moved him in some of that role, behind the tackle, that sort of thing, moving him around. Maybe I don't know that necessarily he might be ready for that, but he's a guy I thought he could probably move, work into that spot. I don't know if that was your guy, but
we thought of the two of us simultaneously, Dominic DeLuca.
Yeah,
maybe not
and that's
big
another
enough.
one too. That's a really good one from an experience standpoint, because Dom could be. I just like the way Max really looked at how mobile and how much he could probably how impactful he could be. But again, as a young player, DeLuca being really just around the ball a lot, with the interceptions, and then if he could just generate some of that, a little bit of that pass rush. I think that he's got some of the a little bit of the speed and some of the mobility to do that. But you saw him the way he can make plays behind the line of scrimmage, and that probably is a really big piece of that role too. That would be that's a good one too.
Well, it was only because Mark, in his description, like that football player that knows how to play, can erase some mistakes of other people because they know how to play. It was that description. Because the one thing DeLuca doesn't have is the weight. I mean, that is something that would be my concern about. Okay, depending on how Jim would want to use him, the weight part of it comes in. Granville's got the weight, and he's going to put on more good weight here. I'm anxious to watch Max play during the course of the spring.
I think with Dom too, that there would not be a whole lot of language issues, or not language issues, but like terminology issues, conversation issues between Jim and Dom. I think their personalities seem to me that they're going to click pretty quickly, and that Dom might be a guy that Jim is leaning on in that defense too, to kind of be his gateway into it. I think maybe Tom Allen and maybe used like Kobe King in that way, and I think Jim might use Dom in that way as well.
Well, and that's the thing that he wasn't really asked. You only have so much time to do this. Like, what language does he want to use? How much of it the language he's been used to using versus what the language the players themselves have been used to hearing for years? Because everybody in this defense has either played for Manny Diaz or they played for Tom Allen. I mean, I'm talking about, you don't have time to ask those questions, but that would have been one that I was thinking of.
Yeah, he did, in a general sense. He did mention how he was that he was willing and seemed agreeable to assimilate more into a defense, that he wasn't going to come in and kind of Bigfoot all over the thing and say, this is what we're doing. And I'm sure that came up very clearly in their conversations, because James Franklin has mentioned that multiple times over his last couple of defensive hires with Manny and with Tom, is that he doesn't want somebody to come and remake it. That he has that he has a good a culture of defense at Penn State. He just wants somebody who can operate it at a very high level. Even Jim acknowledged that. I mean, the thing that he seemed to be really click onto in his conversations with James was what he termed the culture of defense. It was I think the interesting thing that stuck out to me when I went back and re-listened to it. It's how he mentioned that some places he went, they're just offenses just go, right? Their tempo, score all the time, constantly. Don't care if they go 3 and out. And he didn't necessarily see that from Penn State. He sees a give and take, a push and pull between offense and defense and how they coordinate. That the offense isn't just out there to score. And if they go 3 and out and the defense is off the field for 35 seconds and has to go back on, it doesn't matter. That the two, they work together. They're a unit. Like the Pistons work kind of the same. There's everything's supposed to be aligned, and that really struck me too. And the way Jim described that, so it seems like he would be willing to with things like terminology and stuff like that. That's going to be a lot of his call, but he's willing to. He's willing to, fit in, assimilate, essentially, into what they're going to be doing there.
What was interesting is that without saying it, he talked about Oklahoma State's offense and how they'd score in 60 seconds. They had to run back on. He didn't say it was Oklahoma State. We all knew what it meant.
Right, he didn't.
Right, you didn't have to say it, but I know what you're talking about. I got it. But when but that's the complimentary part of it that I think intrigues him.
Yeah.
About this job. But again, as you asked him, why now? Why do this now? And he also indicated he had, like at this stage, he'd rather just be a coordinator. He doesn't have to be. He's been a head coach once, and that was at Cornell a long time ago. But he didn't give any indication that would even be a thought for him.
Yeah, he said, "Where can I add to a great team?" was one of the lines that he used, which was instructive. That there's a half of the element, and this has been reported elsewhere. Like I really haven't reported this. It's not my beat, the Ohio State beat.
Sure.
But that half leading up to basically last Monday, the part about him, what happened at Ohio State and maybe what led him to leaving Ohio State has been written and reported out there. However, closely that story hews to the truth, really only they know at Ohio State. I think what then the next line, though, is you have to ask, if you're going to leave a place like Ohio State, that just won a national championship, that today just signed, re-signed Ryan Day to an enormous contract that is resourced heavily and is not going to be in anywhere position. I don't think you have to worry about Ohio State falling back to the pack or anything like that. That's not going to happen there. So if you're going to leave that kind of situation, what situation do you think is going to be as good or better? And it struck me that he said going to a great team and going to a team that he feels like is close. I don't think he doesn't want to. You said he doesn't necessarily want to be a head coach anymore, but I don't think he also wants to go to a situation where he's restarting either. I think the guy wants to win, and he wants to be at the top of his profession. And I think Penn State made that commitment to him to say, you're at the top of your profession right now, and we recognize that, and we want you here.
I will say this about the Ohio State stories, and unlike you, I don't know. Now, do I know one of the personalities there? Of course I do. But I don't know. But I also have heard not a single person deny it. I haven't heard, no, that's not why. No, nope. I haven't heard anybody deny it. What statement do you think it makes about James Franklin and Penn State at this stage that James was allowed to zero in on the person that he thought was the best person for the job, and people around him said, go ahead, that's what you think you need, go get him?
Yeah.
What do you think that says?
I've read and I've heard a lot of people use the term all in, and I think there's a bit of that in there. But I also, in a way, I think that presumes that James Franklin wasn't all in. And that guy's been all in since 14.
Of course he is.
He's just hasn't had. I mean, he just has more chips now. Basically, if you want to continue the metaphor, he has more chips to push into the middle of the table. I remember it was back in, I think it was 2018. He did the coaches caravan in New York City, and before it, that was 2 years. You're coming out 2 years after 2016, and the big. That kind of that 16 Big Ten title run that really kind of came out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But he said, remember this specifically. He was doing like a pre-caravan interview, and he said at that time he was talking about football, capital spending on football, and he said that he did a study over the previous 8 seasons. Again, going back to like 2010 to 2018. This is a while ago. But Penn State ranked at the time 13th out of 14 Big Ten teams in football capital spending. He was pushing it then. I mean, he has mentioned a bunch of times that he didn't think that they were bold and aggressive enough, to use his quote, after 2016. I've heard him say that he wants Penn State to be the number one organization in college football, not team. He's used the term organization, which encompasses a lot more than just, the 120 kids on the roster. It's the full, complete picture. Now he has mentioned it, again, over the past year-ish, year and a half, about alignment, that through line between his office to Pat Kraft's office to President Ben DiPuti's office to the Board of Trustees, that line seems to be straighter and moving, a little more freely. So the all-in concept, while it's always been there with him, I said now I think he's got, his benefactors, people, the people staking him are giving him more chips to push in, and he's doing it.
Yeah. I was disappointed that he gave no answer on Neil's question about where he'd be calling the plays from.
So was I.
You're going to be up in the box.
Which secondarily kind of affects us too.
That's why Neil asked it.
Of course it is.
Neil did not care where Jim.
Very subtly too. I really loved it.
Yeah. Neil didn't really care where Jim was calling it in the state. He just wanted to know if it's up in the box. Where's the box? Now, if it makes it easier, I do know where we're calling the games from, so that part I do know. So we're actually going to be on the same side we were before. So there's going to be some temporary. Now, I don't know if I have to build it myself. That part I'm not up to yet.
I was going to ask that. Are you getting the drywall up yourself in the next couple of you and Jack going to be just like studying that thing out? So.
Oh, absolutely. That's what we're going to do. Because, look, if I'm going to have a temporary structure, I'm going to go all the way. All right. Yeah, Jack and I will build it with TLC. Oh, goodness gracious. All right. So in the spring, when they finally get there for the spring, will be a couple of questions you'll have, Mark, in your mind about this particular team, regardless of who's coaching it.
This team, it's really for the guys returning, right?
Yes.
Especially that 22 crew. I mean, how many of those guys could be gone?
Right.
Legitimately, Drew, Nick, Katron, Zane Durant, and I, that's 5 right there. Those guys easily could have made the decision to go. So did they do this independently? Did they aggregate themselves and say, what was there a domino? Like when Drew decided, did that begin to like kind of push everybody else in a direction? Did they did they kind of group chat this thing as well? Because that locker room, the locker room after the Orange Bowl was, it was quiet, it was still, but there were a couple of players who were just like, it stung, of course, and as you would expect. But I got the sense in kind of like moving through there that even at that point, there felt like this idea that we're not done here. The hugs kind of going through it didn't feel like goodbye to me. I don't know if I was reading too much into it, but they didn't feel as though guys were, a couple who were, sure, but it didn't feel like the whole locker room was then doing clean out day and just going in its own direction. It felt like they're just that some of these guys had this impression, or not impression, but that they felt really strongly that they had another run in them. So that's kind of where I would like to see, go in spring. I don't think we're going to see any of them necessarily much in, through spring, and rightly so. We'll see the younger players, and you'll kind of get a bowl game out of, whatever happens in the spring game. But I'd really like to know how it came about that this core group of players decided that they wanted, they wanted to return, that they had another year in them in college.
Yeah, I'll give you one quick one about that, Mark, because remember last year, Andy Koltanicki comes in, and I asked Andy at one point, and it was during the season I asked him, when did you start to get a feel that you could do some of the elements with Tyler Warren that you've been able to use? And he said, well, for one thing, he said, I couldn't really do it in the spring. He said he didn't do much in the spring. He was a fifth-year player, so he didn't do much. He said it wasn't until they came in, they were recruiting another player, and they said, we just looked at his basketball tape, and he's awesome. He said, and one of the other coaches said, yeah, but it's not like we're looking at Tyler Warren's basketball tape. And Andy said, his basketball tape? Really? He says, yeah. He said, can I see it? They said, sure. They called it up for me. We looked at it and went, well, we can do a lot with that. So that's again. But the point is, in the spring,
at some point too, and that was really
in the spring.
That was a really interesting. Yeah, that was a really interesting statement when he made that, because you could kind of feel the gears turning.
Yeah.
At that point in Andy's head, and I'm with Jim, who's going to be that player, right? You mentioned Dom. I think that's a good start. But that's really good pick. But it's like, will he look at Max Granville too? Will he look at some of these other players and say, I can really do something with that guy?
Because I like what you said about Max, because it was the Fiesta Bowl where they needed somebody to play in that spot, and Max was that guy that they brought in to play that spot, and they did move him into the middle a couple of times like you talked about. And you're talking about somebody who he reclassified, so he never has gone through a winter workout program. He's never gone through a spring practice, and this could be a golden opportunity to be that guy you're talking about.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of snaps, but he's playing in the Fiesta Bowl, and he should have been on Christmas break from high school at that point in his life, and that's a lot of change. So as you said, going through a winter break, going through not winter break, but winter workouts, and then what's next? There's so many players who mentioned through the course of the year about Max and saying just how deliberate he is about his business, and how focused and sharp he is about everything, the holistic package of playing football, which makes me kind of think there's a breakout in there that doesn't necessarily, maybe it doesn't come next year, that maybe it just starts to unfold a little bit next year, but he does seem to be that kind of player that definitely to be watching. If not 26, even definitely 26, but at some point in 25 too. That's why I kind of maybe thought of him in that role.
It's a great pickup. Mark, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks a lot.